Meeple Nation Podcast, episode 413. All things the West Kingdom.
Welcome, citizens of Meeple Nation. For the next 30 minutes, sit back and enjoy.
Meeple Nation Podcast is sponsored by GameToppersLLC.com. Go to their website, check out their amazing product. Find yourself a topper that will fit on your table, because I'm pretty sure they have one that will. They have some amazing mats, some amazing accessories. They have dining leaves that can go over your game topper so you can just leave it up all year long.
Mine's left up all year long.
As are mine. We're both fortunate to have a space available that we can leave them up all year long, but for those who don't, come apart and they can be stored in these great totes that you can put in a closet, behind the couch, under the bed.
Or, even better, you can get leaves and turn them into a regular table.
And legs, even.
And legs.
It could be your all-around dining table, and then on game night, you can pull off those leaves off the top and reveal your table underneath, throw down a mat, and play a game. Go check them out. That's GameToppersLLC.com.
We are the hosts of Meeple Nation. I'm Dave Holliday.
I am Andy Holliday.
And I'm Nathan Howard.
If you like listening to our podcast, visit us online at meeplenation.com. Learn more about us, read our latest blogs. We've built quite a collection of posts at this point. You can also check us out and follow us on our socials, on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram. And if you really, really love what we do, please consider donating to our Patreon. What we do takes a ton of time, and there is a financial commitment as well. It has been a total labor of love for us to this point, and it will continue to be, but it would make it a little easier with your support. Please know that we really do love you and appreciate you.
This week we are discussing everything the West Kingdom. That is Architects of the West Kingdom, Paladins of the West Kingdom, Viscounts of the West Kingdom, and bring them all together, Tomesaga.
We played through Tomesaga prior to SaltCon, and then we played Tomesaga again at SaltCon. I thought it was awesome. I thought it went very well. I was glad I got the opportunity to play through it prior to, because none of us got to play but you, Andy, at SaltCon, because we'd sold out all of our tickets for that. It worked out good. Everybody seemed to have fun. We had fun. Well, I guess you didn't have fun, Dave.
Nope.
The rest of us had fun. I guess by the rest of us, that's just me and you, Andy.
Yeah, since Logan's missing, yes.
Since Logan's missing, yeah, and Corey's not here. We went through all three games, and I really enjoyed it. I have my favorites of the games. Some I like more than the others. Overall, I thought the experience was great. Looking forward to trying it again sometime.
Just to set the record straight, I didn't not have fun because I didn't enjoy playing. I not had fun because they cheated on me and played without me.
That's true.
You chose not to be here. You chose family first.
You chose family first. How dare you? So let's get started with the first installment, Architects of the West Kingdom. This was, for a while, I thought it was my favorite one, but it changed my mind as we played through Tomesaga. I think Paladins is my favorite.
Paladins was my favorite, too. Although I really did like Architects.
Yeah, Architects is great. It's a heavy worker placement. There's a main board that you're playing on, and there are locations that you're going to place your workers on. And when you place a worker there, you get to do whatever action is on that particular location. So you might be collecting wood, you might be collecting stone or bricks, or you might be trying to gain villagers as apprentices to come and work for you. The main premise of this is you have a virtue track, and you are going to be moving up and down that virtue track. Now, if you get too far down on the virtue track, you can't build the cathedral, which is one of the main things you're trying to do, is build the cathedral, unless you're an unsavory character and you're not allowed to work on the cathedral. You have the black market, if that's the case, and if you are too far up on the virtue track, you can't go to the black market. So it kind of works both ways. There's benefits to going to the black market, and there are benefits to being able to build the cathedral. I know, Dave, you typically like to go the black market route in this.
Absolutely. In fact, last time I played this game, we got random starting people, and the person that I started with was way high on the virtue track. That's one of the things in this game. Everybody starts with a different setup. So my person started way high up on the virtue track, which made it a point where I couldn't use the black market. So I was really disappointed. But I decided, you know what? I always go the black market route anyway. I'll try and be a good guy, work on the cathedral. I honestly don't remember how the game turned out. It was fun either way. But yeah, no, my preference is the black market. Part of that, though, is also because of my typical almost dig myself in a hole and then come shooting out of the cannon, try and break a game, however you want to call it. So I like to go down there, do a bunch down there to try and build this machine that is just going to get me flying at the end of the game, just in the right time.
Which is why we usually try to end the game quickly.
All right, it's not a race for the galaxy, guys.
The one thing that's unique about this from other worker placement games is when you place a worker on a location, it actually stays there. And when you place another worker on a subsequent round on that same location, that particular action becomes more beneficial. Let's use the forest, for example. If I want to go get wood, I place a worker there and I gain a wood for every worker I have there. So if it's my first worker, I get 1 wood. On a later turn, if I place another worker there, I have 2 workers there now, so I'm going to get 2 wood. So as you're playing, those actions can get extremely good, but they can get extremely tempting because there's a location called the town center. When you go there, you pay money to the tax stand. Then you get to take a group of workers for every worker you have at the town center. You get to take a group of the same color from a location. Those workers go to your personal board, and they will stay there until you put them in prison. And when you put them in prison, you get 1 coin for every single worker you put in prison. And you can put all the workers that you have on your board that belong to other players in prison, or you can save some. But that's also a very good way to get your own workers back if you're running out of workers, because you do not want to run out of workers in this game. There is a mechanic of what happens if you do, and it is not good. So you want to make sure you're pulling your workers back. But usually it's not a big deal. Someone's usually going to take your workers off if you start piling your workers up on spots. Someone's going to take them and then go cash them in at the prison for coins.
Yeah, it just gets too tempting. You need money in the game, and that's probably one of the best ways to gain money is you collect those people, and then you turn them in, and then you get money for them. I think it's a great mechanic that's included in the game, the way they do it. There are opportunities for somebody to be a dirtbag and keep your pawns. I don't see that as a real benefit to them. So that's something that, yeah, they can do, but they don't necessarily want to do.
And there is a mechanic to get your workers and break them out. You can visit the prison and break your workers out from another player's board. Fairly expensive to do. I believe it's 5 coins, or you gain a debt card. Debt cards are worth negative points at the end of the game, unless you're able to flip them. But there are ways to prevent that if someone's trying to just hoard everybody's workers so they can't place anything.
Something to keep in mind in this game is talk about it being a worker placement, and they do a great job of. But in this game, you start out with, 15, 20?
A lot.
I mean, you have a lot of workers. You can leave workers all over the place and still have workers into place. And the other thing I wanted to clear up is it's really not that tempting to use the town center.
2 of the elements in this game, you have apprentices that you gain throughout the game. You can have a max of 5. You also have buildings that you can build. Those buildings will have icons on them. You have to have apprentices that match the icons in order to build that building and have the correct resources to place that building down. Now, buildings are going to typically give you points at the end of the game, along with some sort of benefit, sometimes in-game benefit, sometimes immediate, sometimes both. If it has a lightning bolt on it, that's an immediate benefit, and you gain it right away as soon as you build the building, or play any card that has a lightning bolt on it. If it has a flag, that means it's end-of-game scoring of some such. There are other benefits, the apprentices, that will increase the effectiveness of certain actions. So if I get a merchant, when I go to the King's Storehouse, that adds an extra thing I can do at the King's Storehouse with one of my actions that I have there. If I have 4 workers there, I can take 4 different actions at the King's Storehouse, which typically the merchant is going to allow you to trade something for something else. 2 different options on the board that you can do at King's Storehouse as well. Some of the apprentices are going to make things better. Like if you get the woodcutter, you go to the forest, you're going to get an extra wood. The apprentices are dual beneficial. They're going to give you the icons you need to build buildings, and they're going to make certain actions better.
The apprentices are really cool, because I had one. Dave, you talked earlier about wanting to visit the black market all the time, but your guy was more pious than the rest of us. And Logan loves to go for the black market as well. I was kind of playing neutral, so I wasn't getting any negative points at the end, because if you're too far down, you'll get some negative points at the end of the game. But I had an apprentice that was super awesome. So anytime I would go to the black market, instead of lose a virtue, it would allow me to go to the black market and not have the consequence. And so Logan, when he was down there, I mean, he was near the bottom, and so he was losing virtue all the time. But I was at the very top of the being able to go to the black market. And every time I went, my apprentice allowed me to not lose a virtue. He was a pious dark dealer.
He just got away with it.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. Who's more cunning than the others. That was a great benefit for me and allowed me to amass quite a bit of points and be useful at that location without really having those severe consequences.
Which worked out really well for you because you destroyed us in that game. When we were playing Tomesaga, you ended up with an epic victory, which we'll kind of explain later. Yeah, you absolutely destroyed both Logan and I in that particular play of the game.
Which was completely ironic because I think that was maybe my second time playing the game ever. So It was just a pure chance. No skill involved.
Well, it was funny because you're like, I don't know what's going on, and you ended up absolutely destroying us. It was kind of funny, actually. Going down on the virtue track and going up on the virtue track. Logan was, like you said, was at the bottom. If you get all the way to the bottom and you have to lose virtue again, then you gain a deck card. On the flip side, if you're at the top of the virtue track and you gain virtue, you get to discard a deck card. So there are penalties if you get too far down and benefits if you get to the top and continue to gain virtue. One thing to note is how this game tracks on how close it gets to the end. Whenever you build anything, whether it's the cathedral or a building card, you place your worker on the guild hall. All your workers you place standing up, unless they're on the guild hall, and you lay them down on the guild hall. And there's little outlines for them to lay down on, and they'll stay there the rest of the game. That tracks when the game ends. Depending on your player count, you look at the track, and when you hit that last spot that's open, that triggers the end of the game. We'll finish the round out, the end of the game triggers, and then whoever triggered the end of the game will get one last turn, and then you'll count up points. I love this game. I love the mechanics of this game. I love what they've done with the worker placement aspect of it. The black market, the virtue track, how all of that interacts is awesome.
It's a very busy board.
It really is.
Which is kind of a little bit overwhelming at first, because there's a whole lot going on. And like Dave, you're talking at first, we have 15, 20 meeples, whatever it is, 20 workers that you have. As you put them in the guild hall, you're diminishing your workers. There is a benefit of putting them in the guild hall. It also balances it out that you all of a sudden have less workers. You have to manage that. You don't want to have too many at a location because you don't want somebody to throw them all in prison. If you start your turn with no workers, big penalty, isn't there?
Yeah, it's actually terrible. I can't even remember what it is because it's only happened once, and it was like when we first got the game. You do not want to run out of workers. It's not good. You want to make sure that you manage your workers well and that you make sure you have workers to play. If you run out, there's a huge penalty. To note, there's an expansion for it. It's Artisans. It adds tools and adornments to the game. So you can add adornments to buildings that you have built for extra points, and you can add tools to your apprentices that gives them extra abilities. I actually have really enjoyed playing with the expansion too. I think it was a great addition.
And that was in art when we played, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Architects is great. I think it's a fantastic game all around. Like you said, they just did a really solid job with every part of the game as far as I'm concerned.
So next in line is Paladins of the West Kingdom. So all these games are falling right into our medieval Dark Age theme that we've been going over the last 2 episodes. Paladins, so it's the next chapter in the saga. Vikings are plundering wealth and livestock and attacks coming from all sides. As noblemen and women, players must gather workers from the city to defend against the enemies, build fortifications, spread faith throughout the land. Fortunately, you are not alone. In his great wisdom, the king has sent his finest knights to help aid in our efforts. Ready the horses, sharpen the swords. The paladins are approaching. There's a lot of similarities between this game and the other game. There's a lot of iconography that matches over, and you'll find this in Raiders of the North Sea, in all of its variants, that there's similarity in the artwork, the feel of these games. I think if you're playing any of these games, is super beneficial because you're like, oh, okay, that looks familiar. It helps you learn the game a little bit easier. In this game, there's difference because you have a deck of paladin cards. You're going to use one of those paladins each turn, strategically planned because each of those paladins has different abilities. At the first of your turn, you're going to draw 3 cards. You're going to choose one of those 3 cards to keep, one to put on the top of the deck, and one to put on the bottom of the deck. One that you want to hopefully get later in the game, maybe don't need its benefit right now, take advantage of, which is going to help give you more resources, give you more opportunities early on, opposed to maybe saving one of those paladins that's going to be far more beneficial to you later in the game.
So the game lasts for 7 rounds. To note what you said, Nathan, is as you're picking those paladins, one of them is going on the bottom. So later in the game, as you're putting those paladins on the bottom, you're not going to see them again. Beginning of the game, yeah, you can plan, okay, I'm going to use this later. This is a great card, but I'm going to use it later. Towards the end of the game, it's a throwaway. I'm not going to see this again. I can't plan around this paladin. He's basically out of the game. But I do like that mechanic a lot with the Paladins, where you're drawing 3 and picking something. And these Paladins, they temporarily increase your track on the side, like with the Virtue track in Architects, but you're actually tracking 3 different attributes. You're tracking faith, strength, and influence. And when you play a Paladin, that Paladin will actually have values on their strength, influence, or their faith.
It will give you a temporary boost
For that round. And it matters because as you're playing certain things, you have to meet a threshold to take certain actions. Kind of help you strategize on it, particularly on what you want to do on your turn. If you don't have your marker high enough on the track on your own, that Paladin can actually help you maybe take an action that you normally wouldn't qualify for. You have workers in this game too, but it is completely different from the way the workers work in Architects of the West Kingdom. There are a bunch of different colors. There's actually 6 different colors of workers, and they don't belong to a single player. Those are in a pool that you can gain from the tavern at the beginning of the round. Everybody gets to pick a tavern card, and it'll have depicted on there workers. Laborers, which are just generic workers that can go in any space that is a generic space. On your player board, everybody's going to have locations that you can place your workers. Some will require specific colors or specific types of workers. Others will be just generic, and you can put anything there you want. There's laborers, which are white, scouts, which are green, merchants that are blue, fighters that are red, clerics that are black, and criminals that are purple. Criminals are a little interesting, because whenever you gain a criminal is a wild. It counts as any color you want, but whenever you gain a criminal, you also get a suspicion card. Suspicion cards are going to let you potentially take money from the pile of the suspicion fund, or there's 7 coins at the beginning of the game there. Flip a card over, you gain the suspicion card, and you gain whatever coins are shown on that card. When that pile runs out, the Inquisition happens. And we'll explain that in a little bit, what happens when the Inquisition hits. You'll end up counting your cards and seeing who has the most suspicion. The purple workers are incredibly useful because you're drafting the tavern cards. Someone takes the color that you really want to use to do the action you want to do that round. A purple worker, a wild, can mean that you can actually accomplish what you want to do, but it does come with a cost. On your individual player boards, you have 2 sides. You have the left side and the right side. On the right side, you have a line of buildings that are your workshops. This is one of my favorite parts of this game, are all the workshops. You can build a workshop. It costs you 2 workers of any type and 4 coins. You get to take the workshop off of its location on your board and put it on another location that has a little dotted line. And what it does is it makes a location cheaper for you to take the action there. The actions on the right-hand side of your board take 3 workers to do. All of them will take 2 specific workers and a generic worker. You can place a workshop over top of one of those requirements. The first workshop you place, for example, let's say you want to do the commission action. If I place a workshop over the first spot on my commission space, the commission action normally requires a green worker, a generic worker, and a black worker. I can take and build a workshop over there and cover up the green worker, so it only costs me a generic worker and a black worker to do the commission action. Also, each action will cost provisions, depending on how far up you are on your track. The first few times you've taken an action, it's cheaper. It costs 1 provision. The further you go up on that track, monks, for example, in the commission action, you have monks on your track. The more you take off, the more expensive it gets, the more provisions it's going to cost. And by the end of the game, those actions are costing you 3 provisions for each time you take them. But there is a benefit. For example, when you remove a workshop and place it on your board, it uncovers a worker, and you actually immediately gain that worker and put it in your pool to use that round. You don't have to use all your workers in your turn. You can carry up to 3 over to your next turn, which can be beneficial if there's something you want to do specifically but maybe are missing a specific worker. Speaking of workers that you may need a specific worker to do an action that you can't do, and a wild would come in real handy. Well, there's a spot on your board that you can do that. It's actually the Conspire location. You can put a worker down on the Conspire location and then just gain a purple worker from the supply. Anytime you gain a purple worker, you also gain a suspicion card.
This game, I think, does a great job with the workers, with the theme fitting with just the Conspire action. You're becoming more suspicious. The right side of your board where you're talking about the workshops and the workers that you place, I just love that. I've only played I think I've played it twice, but it's been a long time. Really liked how that all worked out. I didn't ever like paying 3 workers to do something, so I really focused on I need to get these workshops put in place as quick as possible. I don't know, I just thought that was a really cool mechanic. Again, going back to what we talked about with Architects, they just did a really good job with mechanics and making everything work together in that game.
And you speak about everything working together. That's one of the very unique things about these actions that they have on the right side of the board. The actions are Commission, Fortify, Garrison, Absolve, Attack, and Convert. Your Faith is a black marker, Influence is a blue marker, and your Strength is a red marker. We'll go back to the Commission action since that's what we've been talking about. When you play the Commission action, you pay the cost in workers and you pay the cost in provisions. You take a monk from your player board, and you're going to put it onto the main board. And it's going to be according to your current faith level, plus any faith that your paladin gives you. And that will tell you where exactly on the main board you can place your monk. And when you place your monk, you're going to cover up a spot on the main board and immediately gain the benefit of that location. The faith locations go from 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. So if I have 0 faith, I can still do an action. I can still take a monk off and perform an action there. Obviously, fill up fairly quickly at the beginning of the game. Now, when I do that, instead of increasing my faith by taking that action, I'm actually increasing my influence. When I take that monk off, it uncovers a point of influence. So I go up on the influence track. This is how all of the actions work. As I'm taking tokens off my board to place them on the main board, I'm actually increasing a different attribute. Have to try to diversify a little bit, which I think is great. You can't just focus on one thing. I mean, there are 6 different actions that you can take over there. Every combination possible. There's always 2 things that you can do to gain an attribute. So if I want faith, I have to either do Absolve or I have to do the Garrison action. One thing to note, as you're doing these, each one is going to give you different benefits. We should probably explain this. On the main board, you're going to have several different things going on. You have the King's Commission, ways to earn points at the end of the game. There's going to be 3 cards that will be out there. The first one's flipped over at the beginning of the game, and then at the beginning of the round, we'll flip over another card. First 3 are going to be King's Commissions cards, and that's what is going to determine bonus points at the end of the game if whoever qualifies. The remaining 5 cards, 2 of them will get flipped over in the 4th round, but there's 5 cards with a green seal on them, and those actually create new action spaces that anybody can use on the main board. On the top side of the board, there are villagers that you can gain, and they work a lot like the apprentices in Architects of the West Kingdom. Increase the effects of certain things. They'll have triggers like when the Inquisition happens, so you can gain these villagers, or one of the things I really like about this is you can send them on a quest. They have an immediate bonus that you can gain by sending a villager on the quest. Pay the cost, if any, immediately gain that benefit, and that villager gets discarded and is out of the game. A really good way to cycle through villagers, and it's fairly inexpensive to gain the benefit, versus getting a villager to permanently be in your play area is a little bit more expensive, but obviously long-term can be more beneficial.
It allows you to bring out those villagers that you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
That you want to hire, that you want to add to your tableau.
And it gives you a benefit on top of it. So it's kind of a dual benefit. It makes it so if a villager's really not working for the strategy you're going for, it can still be beneficial to you in other ways.
I always want the villager. I never want to send them on a quest. I always want to use their ability.
I was the same way. I always wanted to hire him because I was looking at those abilities thinking, oh, that's going to be great for my increased use to be able to reuse those. At the same point, I lost this game terribly. I was playing something completely different. So I don't know if that worked out well for you, Dave, but just hiring villagers and not sending them on quests ever did not prove fruitful for me.
Yeah, I don't remember outcome or anything like that. I just remember struggling with that because that's me, though. That's how it always is when I'm faced with I can either get this card and use it for the rest of the game, or I can get it and use it one time and then say bye-bye. I don't like to say goodbye.
Right there with you. If I'm going to pay for this card, and even though sending them on a quest is minimal, if any cost, not being able to reuse that ability hampered me, and I needed to change my strategy for sure.
So the difference in cost, it's a generic worker to dismiss them and send them on a quest, and it's a red worker to bring them into your play area. The worker management in this is very unique. It's almost like hand management. You're managing your workers. The workers have to go into specific places many times. If I don't have a fighter and I want to recruit somebody, I may not be able to unless I change it into a purple. But I can always send somebody away, dismiss somebody, because it's a generic worker for me to do that. I don't have to have a specific color. So it can be beneficial if there's something that I have a white worker, what am I going to do with it? I'm just going to dismiss a villager and gain some sort of benefit that may allow me to continue my turn, or maybe allow me to make an action available, but I didn't have the resources. I really enjoyed the actions on the right side of the board because they'll give you a benefit. Nathan mentioned the village is getting attacked by Vikings. There are 2 different things that we can do with the outsiders that are coming in and infiltrating the village. We can either fight them and attack, and when we do that, play the attack action. Your strength has to equal whatever it is on the main board. Works kind of the same way the monk does. So you'll look at the location of the outsider cards, and you have to match that strength. You can pay money to increase your strength by 2 for every coin you spend to be able to fight those outsiders. When you attack an outsider, you typically are going to gain an immediate benefit. Now, the other thing you can do with outsiders is you can convert them. If you choose to convert outsiders, they're going to go on the bottom side of your player board and will give you a benefit. Typically, it's going to be end of game points, but there are various benefits that you can get for converting outsiders. The absolve action lets you take little pots off of your player board and move them to a different location on your player board, and you get to cover up a location that's going to give you a benefit. It might let you flip a debt, let you discard a suspicion card, and whenever you do the absolve action, you always get rid of a suspicion card. So you could potentially get rid of 2 suspicion cards. It can also give you a villager or let you remove your workers from a location that you've already placed them on your board. They would go back to the supply, but that would open up that action to be used again. So let's talk a little bit about the Inquisition. Once the money in the tax area is completely depleted, the Inquisition happens. Everybody's going to count how many suspicion cards they have, and whoever has the most is going to gain a debt card. They will then discard half of their suspicion cards rounded down. I know, Nathan, you had a lot of villagers that had triggers when the Inquisition happened, and it was like crazy good for you.
Yeah, it was awesome. It would allow me to get extra resources. And then towards the end of the game, I actually got the guy that would allow me, if I had a guy who was in there right before the Inquisition started, I could pull my guy out. You and Corey were drawing those cards, doing the suspicion all the time. I was avoiding that. I didn't want the penalties that would come from that. As long as I stayed out of that, I got these bonuses. So it worked out really good. And then towards the end of the one, I could always throw in a worker there that would draw that last suspicion card to cause the Inquisition to happen, which was awesome. Pull my guy out and say, just kidding. Haha, I wasn't there. Be able to reap the rewards. That was great. Kind of the same experience that I had with Architects, working in the black market without getting caught. I was doing the same thing here with working with the suspicion, except for it wasn't nearly as rewarding.
Both Corey and I went heavy on getting suspicion cards. I actually had a villager that gave me the benefit of if I drew a suspicion card that gave me 0 money, I still gained money from it. Silver's pretty hard to come by in this game.
Yeah, you guys were rolling in money, and I was always scavenging for money.
And that's why. Getting suspicion is one of the easiest ways to get money in this game. None of us were really worried about getting suspicion, because you get the suspicion, you can get money for it, and you get a wild worker. Yeah, you may end up with a debt. You got to try to flip the card and get it paid off, gain the benefit of being flipped. Having that extra money was huge, especially if you're trying to get workshops built. Workshops are so expensive. It was interesting to see the dynamic between the villagers that you were focusing on and Corey and I think we were fighting over who was going to get the debt.
You guys were definitely playing a different game than I was. Rolled over, we started to play Viscounts. It was a completely different game. When we first started talking about Paladins, how there's so many similar pieces, similar things that are in this, but there's so much diversity between this game and Architects, even more drastically when you go to Viscounts. Yeah, using the same pieces, and it's like the people at Renegade said, here's the box of Paladin pieces, what else can we do with these? And they made something completely different. You go through all 3 of these games in the West Kingdom series, there's a lot of similar iconography, there's a lot of similar pieces, but these are absolutely different games.
Oh yeah, completely different. They all play very different. They have the same feel, I would say, but gameplay, it's completely different. I would agree, and they're great. I agree. They did amazing with this. So once you finish the 7 rounds, we count up points, and whoever gets the highest score wins the game as far as Paladins is concerned. You kind of talked about Viscounts. Maybe this is a good segue to get into Viscounts a little bit, Nathan.
So Viscounts of the West Kingdom is set at the time when the king's reign is beginning to decline. So this is around 980 AD. Choosing peace over prosperity, our once strong king began offering our enemies gold and land to lay down their axes. But peace is a tenuous affair. As poverty spread, many people lost faith in his ability to lead and sought independence from the crown. Since finding favor in his courts, our future has also become uncertain. As Viscounts, we must be wise and decisive. Loyalty is to be upheld, but gaining favor among the people must be our priority should there be a sudden shift in power. One thing that I didn't realize until we were really working on the 3 games together is that the story that is being told. I would encourage you, if you enjoy these games, just to kind of look at that. Look at the story and history that it's telling. It's kind of cool. And they're really super games, too.
So this game kind of has a rondel, and Nathan likes rondels.
I do like rondels, but I didn't like this game so much.
Really? This game I thought was great.
This is by far my least favorite of the 3. A lot of that is because of me. not necessarily understanding the benefit of the center of the board. When we played, Andy and Logan were all over that influence in the middle. Logan in particular was just blowing up left and right.
Oh yeah, big time.
I don't think I ever got a single worker onto the center. Everything I had was trying to work around the outside of the board, which actually I was still surprised I was as close as I was and still involved, which is a very big point for me in a game where there are avenues to win that aren't necessarily everybody has to do the same thing. When a game does that and does it well, I cheer for that game. I avoided the center of the board completely. Had I done it even a little bit, maybe got one or two guys up to the center, it would have made a big difference for me. Even going around the outside of the city, taking advantage of trying to get actions that are on the outside of the board to work with what I had on my board was awesome. I really enjoyed that. I'm going to say again that Andy and Logan were playing a much different game than I was playing.
One thing that I thought that they did that was interesting on this is you have a hand size of 3 cards. You actually have a hand of villagers in this. There's a deck building element in this one. You get to play one of those cards on your player board. There'll be a coin value on that particular villager, and that's going to determine your movement. So you have your Viscount is actually on the board, and that will determine how many spaces you get to move your Viscount. And you have to move exactly that number of spaces. If I play a card with 2 coins, I have to move 2 spaces. I can take different routes to get to different locations, get to the location I want to get to, bouncing to the inner ring and the outer ring, but I still have to take my full movement. Once you move, each part of the board will have a stack of villager cards. You can choose to recruit that villager, or you can choose to use that villager for their ability and dismiss them. If you choose to do that, you're going to gain whatever icons they have on them. Several different icons on the villagers. There's the trade icon, the build icon, there's the fleur de lis icon, villager icon, the cross, which is the cleric icon. There's also a skull, which is the criminal icon, which is also a wild. Kind of like with Paladins of the West Kingdom, there is a penalty for playing criminals. You're going to choose whether you're going to dismiss that villager that's face up in the stack to use their ability. Then you get to take an action. If you're in the outer ring, you get to either trade and take the trade action that's on the location you're in, or you can build. You have a choice of 3 different types of buildings that you can build. You can build a trading post, a guild hall, or a workshop. You will have 3 of those on your player board that will be covering up certain spots. And you get to choose which one you build, and it will uncover an ability that will become available to you once you build that building. And you will also place your building on the main board and cover up a spot. When you cover up that location on the main board, you gain whatever benefit you cover up. There's also a benefit in between 2 building spots. If both those building spots get built, then both players gain the benefit of whatever icon is in between those 2 buildings. However, if it's the same player, you only get the benefit once. You don't get it twice. You get to take whatever actions on the spot that your Viscount is, and then you can choose to recruit the face-up villager that's in that location. Finally, you'll get to resolve any collisions on your virtue track. You'll have a virtue track, you have a corruption marker and a virtue marker, and those are going to be moving throughout your turn, depending on what you do. Virtue starts on the right, corruption starts on the left. If one gets placed on top of the other, then that's a collision. They stay together the rest of your turn, so if they move together. Wherever they end up at the end of your turn, you're going to resolve that collision. Something will happen to you, whether it's a benefit or a penalty, depending on whether you're virtuous or depending on if you were a little more corrupt. All the other players are going to gain some sort of benefit or penalty as well. If I'm very virtuous, I'm going to gain a benefit. Everyone else is going to get penalized somehow. For example, if I'm all the way up on the virtue track, I'm going to gain a coin, and I'm going to gain 3 deed cards, which are worth points. Everybody else is going to gain a debt card, and they're going to move their corruption marker 1 towards the corruption side. However, if I'm all the way on the other end, on the opposite end, then I'm going to gain 3 debt cards, but I'm also going to get 4 coins. Everybody else is going to get a deed. Debt cards are worth negative points at the end of the game unless I get them flipped. Once I flip them, they're going to give me a resource of my choice. After that happens, you're going to just draw up to your hand size, and your turn ends. One thing to note, when you play a worker at the beginning of your turn, you're going to shift all your workers over, and there's 3 locations for workers on your player board. Those workers are going to remain in play for 3 rounds. After that 3rd round, they're going to drop off, and some will have a drop-off abilities too. So when they drop off, if they have a drop-off ability, you'll resolve that as soon as they drop off your board into your discard pile.
I liked this mechanic a lot.
I did too.
Like you mentioned earlier, you have that deck building aspect where you're adding people from the board to your deck, Unlike Paladins, you're going to go through this deck multiple times. You want to be able to try to monopolize on getting those guys that are going to be beneficial, cycle through that are going to give you the benefits that you need when you need them. I was getting really good at that. Not as good as everybody else, but I thought I was doing really good at that. Whole aspect of when you play a card, and then when it's in your tableau area, so you have those 3 spots, that you get that continued benefit. And then sometimes when those cards fall off that board, you get that benefit at that point. The whole blend of all those coming together and working together. I think it was part of the collisions usually where you had the opportunity to shuffle those cards.
Right, yeah.
And so if you wanted a card to fall off sooner than later, you're watching other people, how close are they to a collision? So then, okay, I'm going to play this card now in hopes that Andy's going to have a collision on his turn, and I'm going to be able to put this card at the end, and that card's going to fall off, and then I'll get that benefit. The diversity between all 3 of these games is awesome to be able to use similar components and to have a totally different experience. The whole tableau of those villagers shined for me.
Yeah, I agree. And this is another reason why you would want to try to determine what the other players are going to do, because if their Viscount ends their movement on your location, you get to move your cards around. That's another instance where you get to change the order of the villagers that are on your board. Like you said, Nathan, that can be hugely beneficial if you have the right cards down. One thing we didn't mention is what the actions are in the inner ring. Like Nathan said, one of the things that Logan really focused on. One of those actions is to put your workers on the center hub, the castle location. Mechanic of this is really interesting. You're going to place a number of workers based on the number of fleur-de-lis symbols that you have on your villagers that are face up. As with any of the actions, there's a resource that is tied to each of the actions. So there's stone that's tied to the build action. There's silver that's tied to the trade action. Inkwells are tied to the cleric action, and gold is tied to the fleur-de-lis or the villager actions. If I have just one fleur-de-lis or even a gold I can spend, that's going to give me 1 worker. Now, if I want to place 2 workers, it's going to cost me 3. Any combination of symbols or resources, 5 for 3 workers and 8 for 4 workers. And I'm going to place those workers in the first tier. Castle has 3 tiers. I'm going to place it on the first tier of the location that I'm on, and then I'm going to resolve it. I'm going to resolve the first tier first. If it has 3 or more workers of my color, I'm going to move 1 to the right, 1 to the left, and 1 up to the next tier. And then I look and see if any of the other bottom sections have 3 of my workers on them, and I do it again and again and again. Once the bottom ring is all resolved, I move to the second ring, and I do the same thing. If I have 3 of my workers in there, I'm going to move 1 to the left, 1 to the right, and 1 to the third tier. Whenever you move up, you gain a benefit. Logan did amazing at this.
I was blown away when he would add guys, and it felt like 10 minutes later he'd have 4 people in the middle now, or he had none. Being able to expand those guys and push them. Also the benefit at the end, he gets to discard some, right?
If you ever have more than 3 of any workers in any of the sections, then whoever the active player is gets to discard workers from those sections. You gain benefits for your worker getting discarded depending on which tier you're on. If somebody's on the tier 3, then you can't be discarded. Only the first tier and the second tier of the castle.
He had that all the time. He was spreading those guys out, giving you back your meeples, continued to move his all the way up to that center tier. It was impressive to watch.
I did go with that strategy, but I didn't go for it for the same reason Logan did. There was actually a location on there to flip deck cards, which is why I kept going to that same side of the castle, because one of our goals for Tomesaga was to have 6 flipped deck cards. So I was trying to get deck cards flipped, which is the biggest reason why I went there. At the end of the game, that's worth a lot of points if you can get your workers on there, because you get 1 point for every worker on the bottom tier, 2 points for every worker on the second tier, and 3 points for every worker on the top tier.
And that's where Logan got all of his points.
Right. So the other action you can do is you can transcribe text with your cleric action. So you're going to count up your crosses, supplement that with inkwells to gain those tokens off the board. Always a benefit. So sometimes it's an in-game benefit, extra points. For example, how many criminals you have. It may give you an extra 1 point for every criminal you have in your deck at the end of the game. Sometimes it's just an immediate benefit. You may be able to flip a deed or flip a debt. But you'll gain that benefit, and you take that token and put it in front of you. And then at the end of the game, you're going to score points for sets. Each of those will have a different color ribbon on those books. And you score points depending on how many sets you have. The more sets you have, the more points you're going to get. If you're going to go with that strategy, you want to go heavy into it so you can get a lot of points. Also, if you're the first to get the 3 of that same color, then you're going to gain the bonus card. Now, if you ever surpass the person that has the bonus card, you're going to take it from them. and that's worth a point at the end of the game, and it also is going to give you some benefits. There's a lot going on with this game. It seems like it's simple because going around taking actions, but there's actually a lot going on.
I really wanted to like this game. Like I already mentioned, it was the least favorite of the three for me. But there are still some very clever mechanics, opportunities to make this game still kind of high on my list of games that I like. When I knock it and say it's not my favorite of the three, not saying that I don't like the game, because the game is still very enjoyable. Our experience, when we introduced Tomesaga to all this, that really changed how each of us played the game, because
Absolutely.
There were some objectives in Architects, there's objectives in Paladins, there's objectives in Viscount. And Viscount was especially frustrating for me because I was working really hard on those objectives. I was watching Logan because I thought Logan was the person I needed to watch. Without fail, I was always a turn behind Corey, claiming those Tomesaga goals. Wait, that card's gone. Where did that card go?
I think you yelled at me a few times when I did that too.
Maybe, yeah. But I was really kind of bummed out because every time I'd go to claim that card because I had that goal in mind, somebody had taken it right before I was ready to grab it. I think adding the Tomesaga changed the game enough. It changed the game drastically, I think. Still focusing on winning those games and going through the end game scoring and being able to accomplish those in-game victories. However, each game there was 3 cards that we were targeting, trying to claim those as a bigger reward. And not necessarily a bigger reward, but as a reward. And then each of those cards would give you an advantage in the next game. Going into Paladins, I had some huge advantages.
Huge.
And then I got skunked in Paladins. And I shouldn't have. As we started the second game, I thought this was going to be very much a rich get richer kind of scheme.
I felt the same way. Yeah.
When I was totally blown out of the sea with Corey's actions, it was completely different. The advantages Corey had in Viscounts, it was a benefit to him for sure. It didn't give him the victory. Logan was able to skunk us in that.
Logan destroyed us in that game.
Did he have an epic victory?
Oh yeah. I was second place, and he more than doubled my score in that game. It actually plays to your point that you're making right now. Logan knew he wasn't going to win Tomesaga. Corey took over for him. Logan took second place in Architects. I took last. The benefit that Logan got from that was fairly minimal, but then Corey won Paladins. And Logan coming into Viscounts knew he wasn't going to win Tomesaga. Besides, you were so far ahead of us in Tomesaga that we all figured you were going to win. He just went to win the game. The rest of us were trying to get the goals for Tomesaga because we wanted to win Tomesaga. He destroyed us.
So he really was playing a different game than we
He really was.
And then at the end of the Tomesaga, I ended up with 7 points for that victory. Corey had 6 points from that, and then you had 5. And then Logan had, I think, 1 point.
He actually had 3 because he had an epic victory.
That's right.
So he had 3 points.
So, I mean, he still participated, came in last place, but for essentially only playing 1 game of the Tomesaga, he was almost half my points.
Which, that epic victory is huge. The way it works with an epic victory is there are 3 cards that will be face down, but they count as tome cards. And if you get an epic victory, you get all 3. If you get just a regular victory, then you're going to split the rewards between the other players. When someone gets an epic victory, the second place person is going to get some little banner tokens to claim the banner tomes that are face up at the beginning of the saga. Once you get 3 of those icons, whether they're on your tome cards or whether they're the tokens themselves, you get to claim those and they count as a tome. Logan gained one of those tokens during the first game, but you gained all 3 of the face down tome cards. Plus you gained tome cards during the game that gave you benefits for the next game. Huge benefit. And that sets you up to win Tomesaga. Even though you didn't perform quite as well in the other 2 games, that epic victory was so big. Yeah, Logan got an epic victory. If it would have been Corey or I, we would have won.
Absolutely.
If we would have gotten an epic victory like Logan did. That would have been the only way we could have beaten you, though.
And that's the other thing that's kind of fun about Tomesaga is Tomesaga allows you to play all 3 of these games in a cooperative option.
Yeah, we haven't played that, but it sounds really interesting what they've done and the additions they've made to it to make it a cooperative game.
So that's something that we'll have to look forward to maybe trying again later this year. Maybe include you, Dave, since you've been silent this whole episode. Thanks for coming.
Hi.
The Tomesaga really linked all these together, and like Dave mentioned earlier, that this is a continued story. There's a story in Architects, there's a story in Paladins, and the story concludes in Viscounts, and then the Tomesaga kind of just ties in those loose ends between the games. Really small box, but it adds big flavor to the game.
For sure. Just make sure that when you're explaining the rules, that you're not explaining the co-op rules if you don't want to play the co-op version. It wastes a lot of time.
But now we know how to play Tomesaga Cooperative for Paladins.
Yes, we do. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Doing the trilogy and doing Tomesaga was fun. Before we did that, still some of my favorite games I own. I love the West Kingdom series. Played the Raiders series prior these ones started coming out, and they were okay. The first expansion for the Raiders game definitely made the game better, but when I bought Architects, I fell in love with it right off the bat. Every game that's come out since and the expansions, I've just thoroughly enjoyed.
It's well done, for sure. I enjoy the Raiders of the North Sea series. Many great experiences with that, but these are good too.
Yips.
So that concludes our Dark Age medieval games series. Next week, we'll be a little bit on the sci-fi end. Look forward to that. Let us know what you think of the West Kingdom series. What is your favorite game of the three, and your experiences if you've played through the Tomesaga? Reach out to us. Let us know. meeplenation@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Or join us on our Facebook group, Meeple Nation Off Air.
Until next time.
We'll see you in the Dark Ages of the West Kingdom.
As always, we want to thank you for listening.
Check out our website. We have all sorts of cool things there. Love those blogs. Get a deeper look into the writing side of Meeple Nation.
Join our Facebook group, Meeple Nation Off Air. I look forward to seeing you there.
Follow us on Twitter @Meeple Nation. We also have Instagram.
Under the same name. We also want to thank our sponsor, GameToppersLLC.com.
We love their product, and they have so much goodness out there.
And we also want to thank Rating Detergent for our music.
We are the hosts of Meeple Nation. I think I just said Meeple Nation.
Okay. Well, you don't need to stop. You can just start it over. And
Okay. You're a dork. It's not a race for the guy. You could have said it with me.
sorry.
Everybody together. It's not a... One more time. All right, it's not a race for the galaxy, guys.